Welcome, everyone, to the podcast of the Center for Asian American Christianity. My name is David Chao, and I direct the CAAC. Today, it is my privilege and delight to host a conversation with Jessica ChenFeng, who is Associate Professor of Marriage and Family Therapy at Fuller Seminary, and also with Joel Jin, who is Acting Assistant Professor at the University of Washington School of Medicine. Joel, Jessica, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, David. So good to be here with you both.
Thanks for having us.
One of the reasons that I wanted to host this podcast is that a very good colleague of all of ours, Carissa Dewey-Wardani at Biola's Rosemead School of Psychology, she mentioned to me that the Journal of Psychology and Theology has a special issue this summer on Asian American contexts. And so I wanted to talk with both of you, since both of you had significant responsibilities with respect to this special issue of the Journal of Psychology and Theology within Asian American context. Let me just, for the sake of our viewers, this will all be very familiar to Joel and Jessica. Let me just read some of the titles of these articles. It begins with the integration of psychology and theology within Asian American contexts, integration of psychology and theology, reflections from over 40 years of involvement, for us, by us, integrating psychology and theology within Filipino American Ministry Initiative, a community case study for enhancing integrated mental health treatment for Asian Americans, mixed methods needs assessment of mental health among Asian American Christians, Asian American cultural resources to protect from racial trauma and to promote post-traumatic growth, the good life, and then two more, disentangling integration of psychology and theology, a decolonial critique. And then last, come and see an integrative invitation to intercultural reflection and community. When you hear all those titles, Joel and Jessica, it sounds like a lot of work to pull together all of these various contributors on these important themes. Tell me a little bit more of the backstory. How did the idea for this special issue come about?
If I can defer to Joel, because I really think this started with Joel, and it's been such a delight to collaborate together. But I think Joel's the one who should be telling us the story.
Yeah, of course. Well, it was so fun. It was a fun journey, even though it's a heavy research and academic lift. The story goes back to the pandemic, 2020. And so I was talking with a couple of friends and colleagues, Dr. Ed Ng and Josie Huang, and we're all three Fuller alumni. And so we had gone through the clinical psychology program at Fuller, and we just started to think about our identities as Asian North Americans, so some Asian Canadians, Asian Americans, third culture, and we wanted to see more academic products, more scholarship that reflected our realities and what we were thinking about in terms of our psychology, our Christian theologies, and who we are as cultural beings as well. So that was kind of the genesis of that. Dave Wang who was at Biola at that time, the editor of Journal of Psychology and Theology, had an open ear to that. And I kind of pitched this idea, and he was like, let's do it. Let's go for it. I really want to encourage young voices, and we're not too young, but early career. And he wanted a variety of voices. And so that was all the encouragement that we needed. That was important for us.
That's awesome. I'll kind of put my scholarship hat on for a minute and just ask about the scholarly contribution this journal article makes. So for our graduate students, for our current clinical psychologists and therapists, some of whom have advanced degrees, I'd love to hear and learn from both of you what contribution this journal issue makes in advancing the conversation.
If I can briefly speak to, because Joel and Carissa are trained in clinical psychology, and my guild or field of marriage and family therapy, there's of course overlap. And what I'll say, because my doctorate was done in MFT at an institution that didn't necessarily have the sort of Christian integration that Fuller and Biola are more known for, the journals my field tends to publish in are not necessarily overlapping with a journal like JPT. So on my end, this is a newer journal to me. And as someone who has felt like I have not had that much company as an Asian American doctoral level MFT who cares about Christian research within Asian American Christian communities. Like, to me, this was a very big deal, if I can say that. And so I'm curious what it's like for Joel coming from the clinical psych perspective. But from the MFT perspective, there has been hardly any known issue dedicated to Asian American Christians and the integration of our faith and our mental health and psychological well being. And so when Joel extended the invitation to serve as guest editors together, I was all in. And we can say more later, but it has just been such a delight and a joy and really a sense of a huge sense of pride as a community coming together to do this, because my expertise is more qualitative research. I think, Joel, yours is more like quantitative. And so there's no way I could have imagined ever doing something like this alone. I think the community voice and network and reaching out to people to submit, all of that was huge in terms of working together. So from my perspective as an MFT, this is a significant contribution across all of our fields.
And it sounds like there's another special issue coming out, Jessica, that you're about to go guest edit on the integration in marriage and family therapy, family systems, and Christian theology.
Oh, okay. Are you? This is a prophetic
This
statement.
is a prophetic
Okay,
statement.
I'm like,
If I
wait,
can,
there is. Yeah, yes, yeah. We'll see. We'll add that to my list.
yeah. Well, it was we really needed that perspective outside of our training, or at least my training, being in that world of Fuller, thinking about Christian theologies, trying to integrate that with secular psychologies. And so that was pivotal. The group effort was so important to me, and there's a tremendous amount of pride. And Dave, to your scholarship question, I keep thinking back to my time at Fuller. This is 2013 to 2019, and I had professors like Al Duick, Brad Strawn, Jenny Pack started to come on board near the end of my time. And then my former advisor, Joey Fung, Kenneth Wang, like these folks like live and breathe this, and I learned so much from them. And I also remember as a student like becoming really excited when I stumbled upon Asian American psychology to begin with. I was like, oh, someone has studied parenting like in my family. And then let alone some people have written and studied about psychology among Christians or even Christian psychologies. And so for those two worlds that were new to me, because I came from more of a neuroscience secular background in my undergrad, I got really excited at this prospect. And so I wanted to create this kind of special issue with Jessica, Carissa, and Dave so that there would be other students who are like me to say, I can write about this, I can study this, I can describe this, I can translate this for my community. And then, of course, for any early career professionals too, to be encouraged that there's a need for this kind of work, um, and someone can make a career studying these kinds of topics. Sometimes I think culturally nuancing psychology often becomes a side conversation, or it's like afterwards we think about culture. So how do we make this at the forefront and front and center? That was the hope that this spurs on for other folks.
Yeah. Can I add something to that? I so appreciate what you just said, Joel, because I think it's one, I don't know about you, Joel, when I was a doc student and I would read like the one lone article on, I don't know, Korean American families and this topic, it was like a standalone in this issue that was largely on other communities, right? But to have a complete issue dedicated to Asian American Christians and mental health and psychology, to me, like I think about the doc student, like you're saying, who gets to see, like, it's not just that there's like random Asian American Christian scholars out there doing it alone, that there's a group of them, and there's a critical mass, and there's movement, and there's social connections and relationships. Like, I think that's a very different landscape than the one many of us saw or felt when we were students. And so I think our hope, I imagine, as professors and mentors, that people coming after us who are currently in the fields get to see that there's professors and researchers who care to work together. And I think it's safe to say all of us, every author represented here, is open and would want to support any up and coming researchers and scholars. But yeah, that sort of mentorship and modeling aspect is significant.
Of course.
And I did not read all the names of the contributors because that would just take too long. But we're going to post in the show notes a link to the special issue, and we'll also post the names of those who contributed, because as it's dawning upon me, this is a real signal contribution to advance the field. So part of what I'm hearing from both Joel and Jessica is there's psychology, and it is a challenge and a task for psychology to talk to Christian theology. So that is one barrier that needs to be crossed if you care about the Christian faith and psychology. Then there's something called Asian Americans, and how once you have psychology and theology talking, then there's another sort of challenge, which is how does one integrate this people called Asian Americans into the conversation? If there, and there's at least, around 9 million Asian American Christians, or roughly one third of the 23 plus million Asians in America. And that's what this issue represents. It represents the maturation of a conversation in which psychology becomes integrated and holds as a dialogue partner theology, the Christian faith, along with the Asian American community context. Congratulations. Like, that's a big deal. That's a really, really big deal. And this is why we wanted to have the podcast. Continuing sort of almost methodological or ethno-disciplinary reflection, again, for maybe those with scholarly interest, I'd love to hear more from both of you, the state of the conversation. In other words, there may have been various research paradigms. Joel, you mentioned this word culture, and how now this issue of JPT takes culture into consideration. So I'd love to hear more about the evolution of the conversation involving Asian Americans and mental health, or Asian American Christians and mental health, and the various kinds of paradigms that have evolved over time as method or as the integration of these disciplines.
Oh yeah, that's a great question.
It's a seminar. It's a doctoral seminar, but I'm asking for the cliff notes.
And there's a huge history that we step into as well, because when I was stepping into Fuller as a grad student, learning from Al Duick and Brad Strawn, learning about the different waves of integration that Brad might talk about, we were starting to understand really through his work of traditioning ourselves. And so even the idea of Christianity or Christian theology, there's a variety of traditions. There's different groups of folks who have thoughts and beliefs about theology and how they read Holy Scripture and how they practice and worship. And so then to take that conversation and hold it there on the theology side, and then bring in the psychology, and maybe we should say family systems or family psychology side as well, that there are different types of psychologies. So even at a core, psychodynamic psychotherapy, cognitive behavior therapies, maybe more acceptance, mindfulness based therapies, and I'm sure I'm forgetting lots more there, but that there's different conversations within this large field. And now we try to bring them together within the context of Asian Americans. And like you said, oh, there's a lot for us to unpack. I suppose what I want to ground it in is I remember a summer seminar with Dr. Jenny Pack, just six of us doc students, and she was asking for us to write a spiritual cultural autobiography. And she's a expert in qualitative methods, narrative analysis, and I think at a certain point, we realized we have enough time. And Dr. Pack just moved through each of our stories as a class. And so it was very transformative. It was very academically rigorous. But I just remember thinking, oh, I learned how to think as a Christian from this pastor or from my mom in this particular light. And then I started to think about my emotions and my thoughts and how I act from these professors and these relationships. And all the while, I'm thinking about, oh, what does it mean to be a Korean Canadian who's second generation, and my role in my family, and what it means to be to look a certain way, to think a certain way, and all of that shaping how I am as a professional, as a clinical psychologist. So our we are interwoven and we're embedded in these stories from our perspective, a psychological lens, from a theological lens, from a cultural lens, and there's much to unpack. And I'll just leave it at that for now.
Yeah. Yeah, actually, I love what you're saying, Joel. It was, I'm curious about what conversations are being had in the quantitative research world, because serving as an associate editor for a family process as an MFT journal, I think I'm the primary qualitative editor on there. And so one of the things that I'm always looking at is, are the researchers addressing their own identities and how this intersects with the way that they are looking at the data, the analysis, the methodology? And so I think coming back to this special issue, different journals call it different things, the special issue, I guess when we talk about traditional research, it's really like a white Eurocentric model, which is the researcher is separate from their research subjects. And so when you talk about your research, there's this distance from it. I think this issue does something very different, and it must, because each author and researcher is looking at our own communities. We are talking about us. There is no gap or space between the research content, so to speak, and the self of the researcher. And so that kind of writing, even relationship in the language, the researcher describing this community, which is often our own histories. I think, in my opinion, the reader reading that has a level of understanding the closeness of the researcher to the content. And that is a different experience as someone engaging in this material than, I don't know, I guess what we call like traditional research. I don't know what other way to call it, like the academy has historically encouraged. And so I think when we're talking about our own communities, and you'll see a number of these articles are written, there's some first person voice in some places. There are, like, one of the pilot studies in the first of its kind, understanding the mental health needs of the Asian American Christian community. So, and there's another case study. These are the ones that I served as a primary editor on. What is different is that it's not always the most traditional, let's say, qualitative methodology. But when you're looking at pilot studies or newer research of a community, there needs to be an understanding as editors, as people who are reviewers, right? I'm always wrestling with, oh gosh, am I unconsciously perpetuating colonial mentality when I critique and edit an article? What is the place for a first person voice to come through in this research? Who is it for? And I'm thinking about the researcher's identity too. So I'll stop there, but all of it to say, I think as a whole, this issue does something different than maybe a stereotypical journal issue, because of the voice and closeness of researchers to the community that we're speaking about because we share that identity with the community. Yeah.
This makes me recall something Russell Jung said at our 2019 conference, which is about the 50-year anniversary of Asian American studies. He had defined Asian American studies as studies by, for, and about Asian Americans. And by extension, Asian American theology would be theology that is by, for, and about Asian American Christians. And that's kind of what I hear Jessica saying, is that this discussion of Asian American psychology is by, for, and about Asian American people, communities, traditions. So that's a really apt point, Jessica. I want to pick up something Jessica landed on, which was some of the challenges that go into editing or writing or analyzing as a researcher who is not treating this as merely objective, right? But they have some kind of involvement, relationship with the subject matter itself. So I would like to hear from both of you a little bit more on what are the challenges in crafting this type of special issue. As you all know, mental health is one of the four focal areas of the Center for Asian American Christianity. We have this annual mental health conference and we've done four of these, and it's a very, very well attended, highly engaged conference. And some of the challenges I've faced in framing conferences would be things like different ethnic communities whose stories may overlap but are different in sort of representing the diversity of Asian Americans. And the diversity is not just ethnic, it's also generational. And this is tied to migration histories. It is geographical because, let's say, urban from suburban, from the West Coast to the East Coast to the South, there's so many different flavors of Asian America. And how do we seek to capture that diversity within a single whatever conference, journal, issue, etc.? You can talk about that or you can talk about anything you want, but I'm just curious about the challenges as a researcher in doing this kind of integration work.
Yeah, I think one of the challenges is to reflect as many stories as possible while still capturing some kind of unifying theme. And so Asia Asia America is diverse. And so it was really important, for example, Eleanor Balin and Gabriel Katniss to talk about the Filipino American Ministry Initiative in one of the within this special issue. And that's a cutting edge, innovative initiative across the nation here, right? So to speak not just from like my Korean Canadian perspective or an East Asian perspective, but expanding, and being inclusive like that. I think that is a challenge, and that's what we wanted, at least even at the guest editor level, and we tried to reflect that a bit. And then who we're inviting, essentially using our relational capital to say, hey, we really want to hear from you. We really want your contributions and your expertise, but also your personal story, as Jessica was alluding to, because we know that it's not just the scholarship that we're wanting in this issue, but also the particular voices and the lenses that they bring as well.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. Along those lines, too, I'm thinking of, I feel like these days my life is consumed with editorial work because I have a lot this summer. But but thinking back to some of the articles when they first came in, the responsibility I think we feel as guest editors is how do we honor this really good research and community-based work that these colleagues are offering through their manuscript? And how do we make sure that it meets a level of academic rigor? How do we offer feedback in a way that is relational, supportive, mentor like, right? That, doc students are socialized to believe when you get feedback from an editor, the intention is to cut you down and critique you, and you feel terrible when you get this feedback. I don't think any of us wanted that, right? Like, we belong to the same community. And so we have colleagues on here who are our seniors. They have been our mentors, led us in the field. There are authors here who are currently students. that we would be perceived as mentors to them. Many are our peers. And so I think thinking of our role not only as editors, but as people in community together who are wanting the same things for Asian American Christians across North American landscape. So I think that is not a challenge, but I think it adds a different layer than some of the editorial work I do for the other journal where I don't know the people that I am offering feedback to, right? But in this case, we share community. And so I think the other piece, it's, I would say it was sort of a fun challenge, which is how do I from my qualitative research lens, um, give feedback in a way that strengthens this article, invites the authors to think about the work they've done and deepen it and expand it. I think this is where it's important for us as editors to have critical consciousness about Asian American studies and identity, right? If an article is primarily studying, let's say, East Asian communities, or specifically a Korean American community, that we invite the authors to revise and state that clearly, right? And so in the offering of feedback, that there's a reminder and encouragement, a mentorship around developing that consciousness even in our scholarship. So lots of layers, I think. And I know between myself, Joel, Carissa, Dave, a lot of correspondence over the months where we were doing this to make sure, like, is this a good way to approach this? Are we being thoughtful? And so I think that consultation amongst each other was such a gift and a wonderful way of collaborating.
It's an academic journal, so I imagine that the audience is other academics. What would you hope the audience would take away from a particular essay or the special issue as a whole?
I think there's a lot of nuggets to pull from this special issue. Just even this morning, I was thinking about Helen Chung's article about master narratives and alternative narratives. And it was a qualitative study among Asian American Christians up in Seattle. And, I think one of the nuggets that I would want academics to find is that there are these larger narratives and contexts that Asian American Christians are placed into, that they're just kind of thrown into. And so part of their work is, and the help that they need, is to figure out and become more conscious and more explicit about, okay, these are the stories that I fall into. But is that the story that I'm living out for the rest of my life? Is there a different good life that I'm moving towards instead? So Helen Chung writes about these alternative narratives that contrast these master narratives of accomplishment, success, individualism, compared to an alternative narrative that might be more deeply Christian, that's relatedness, that's about giving and generosity. Um, and so these are really powerful narratives that shape our decisions as people. So it impacts our psychologies. It also impacts, I think, family dynamics as well. So as a parent of children who might, hey, this is the kind of career that we would want. And so I think it offers a lot of room for further academic study to try and clearly label and measure, if you're thinking quantitative methods of measuring the specific constructs of Asian American values, or how an Asian American family might process emotional difficulties, and how that relates to Christian constructs too, of faith, of religiosity, of their beliefs, of how they pray, and how that impacts their, not only their mental health but also their well-being. Because part of this issue is not only to try and capture and describe some of the challenges and the difficulties that Asian American Christians might experience, it's also to offer a counter narrative, some hope, some resiliency of, we ought to study these positive variables as well and see how do we move a community from suffering and challenge to hope and resiliency and thriving as well.
Yeah. I also think that among this set of articles, it's not only for academics. I do think a number of the articles, because it talks about community based work, that pastors, lay people, people in ministry in general, I think a lot of it is very accessible. I know for someone who may not be sort of within the academic world, it might feel daunting to read about a research study. But what I want to invite people to take a look at is you can sort of skim through some of that research language, but you can skip to discussion and results and conversations at the end of articles, because I think there's a lot to take away in the sense that, and I don't know about what you both see in your communities. I think as human beings, we're inclined to align with the communities we belong to. And this is often split by ethnic identities. And so, while there are many voices we wished we could have also included, that there was even more diversity in this issue, I think the diversity that it does represent is wide enough where it touches upon, for example, as a Taiwanese American, right? When I was reading through these manuscripts, there is a way that I put myself within the voice and perspective of each author and felt like, wow, this is a part of Asian American Christianity I know very little about. What does it mean for me to put myself in the shoes of this author and their community? I would encourage readers to do that, because it is rare for us. We go to church with the same people. We are in community often with similar identifying families. And so to put ourselves is an opportunity to do that and to imagine, gosh, this is a whole part of Asian American Christianity I never get to interface with. And so I think the articles span enough congregations, parts of the geography of North America that allow for that. And so that's our invitation, is to sort of imagine, right? We've got elders here, Dr. Tan. I don't know if Russell would consider, he's, elder to me. Their voices and lived experience, something that I can learn from. And so certainly many audience members. I want to highlight, I think Kristen Fort is a colleague and friend to both Joel and myself, and her perspective as a Black woman, an amazing scholar of Christian integration and psychology. Her voice was such a gift to me. I was tearful when I first read her contribution. And for those of us, when I say us, Asian American Christians, who don't have the gift of deep, meaningful friendship with Black Christian colleagues, to really take in Dr. Fort's words as someone who really is in deep community with Asian American Christians. Her perspective is so thoughtful and relational. And so, just a plug for her final piece there of the issue. Yeah.
Wonderful. I love the commendation of the entire issue to our pastors and lay people out there. That's a good word, Jessica. Let's increase the readership for this special issue. Stepping back a little bit, but still grounded in the special issue, I want to now shift the conversation a little bit more broadly to dynamics you see within our Asian American community when it comes to mental health issues. So I'd love to hear how the articles reflect maybe some of the issues, challenges, barriers of access, barriers of understanding, stigma attached to it, related to mental health dynamics within our communities, how this is reflected generationally, gender wise, etc. And maybe one way to frame this is give us some snapshots and or patterns that we're seeing. So it could be maybe 30 years ago we never talked about X, but now we feel liberated to talk more about X. What might be the reason for that? So I'm interested in trend lines, patterns, and kind of where our communities are at in their struggles with mental health issues.
Yeah, maybe from, again, I mentioned earlier, my work has largely been in marriage and family therapy field and research. One of the classic ways that therapists have typically written about working with Asian Americans is, for example, taking an MFT model, narrative therapy, solution focused therapy. Joel mentioned CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, and saying, let's apply this to an Asian American family, and this is going to be our case study. That work, maybe decades ago, was significant. It shaped a lot of the ways that therapists in training could imagine what it was like to apply a theoretical model to a family of color, an Asian American family. One of the things I love about a number of the articles here is that it was not taking necessarily models founded by European Americans and applying it to our community. But it was starting in our community and saying, this is what we thought or saw was necessary. There are conversations about between pastors and mental health practitioners coming together in the Midwest. I think, was it Chicago, Joel, right? Where
Mhm.
they were just coming together to have conversations about the needs of their communities, and that spurring on ways to collaborate, right? Like that was not founded on any white evangelical model, at least not that we're aware of. Of course, that's always in our unconscious or consciousness, right? But I think a number of these articles really begin with the expertise, the lived experience and knowledge of our community. And historically, at least in the MFT field, that has not been the case. And so that's what I'm really celebrating, is that we're honoring that embodied knowledge that we have. And so we hope that readers will see that and be encouraged to sort of look within ourselves, our families, our communities. Like Joel mentioned, the conversations about resilience, right? A lot of times there's been a deficit model of, this is the problem with Asian parenting, so let's address it with this sort of treatment. We hope that that is not the way that anyone would perceive any of the articles here, because I think it really comes from and centers the Asian American voice and experience, and the research comes out of that.
Yeah, I would echo that too. And I suppose what I'm seeing on the ground in church communities and in the clinical setting as well is that there are more Asian Americans open to seeking professional mental health services. I think there's been a stronger preference to rely on families, friends, clergy, community leaders as kind of the as important and still needed support for mental health and thriving and well-being, but a greater awareness and openness to seeking out professionals as well. So marriage and family therapists, clinical psychologists, mental health counselors. And there's a really nice article, Priscilla Kwong, they do a nice study and they start to highlight some of the needs that are still out there. So there are financial constraints, there are still lack of information, lack of time even, and these serve as not only just individual barriers to seeking out those services, but these are just structural barriers that it's hard for any one person to remove for themselves. And so um, collaborations within between clergy and pastors and church communities, and then also professional mental health service providers. Yeah, I think that kind of collaboration and partnership is really important to say, hey, here's a way to move through these different services, and both are needed and necessary as well. So, for example, I think it was the first time one of my pastors in my current congregation would say, oh, I've been to psychotherapy, I've been to couples therapy, and all our staff go, and you should go. And there's just this explicit, open acknowledgement of using these kinds of services at the pulpit. And I think that helped a lot for everyone else to say, oh, my pastor does this, and so I could try this out as well. Or people who have been using these professional services can also say, oh yeah, I do too. Here's my experience, and it's not as looked upon of there's not as much judgment per se. That still exists, but I think we're moving in a better direction.
Yeah. What you shared, Joel, reminded me of. I don't think this has been captured in any research, but I know I've talked with David a little bit about how, having hosted a number of Asian American Christian therapist networking luncheons, connecting pastors and therapists, one of the things, at least this is in Southern California, that I've heard from Asian American Christian clinicians is historically Christian therapists have been seen as supportive to pastors' ministries. Like they're sort of there to complement, and I'll just be open, Asian American male pastors' ministries. And it's a lot of Asian American women who serve as the therapist or the psychologist to complement that work. What I think, not just this issue, but in the larger landscape, what I hear more and more of is really mutual partnership, is people in ministry seeing, wow, I'm realizing how limited I am in my training and understanding of mental health. I have colleagues, men and women, who have doctorates, master's degrees in these areas. How can we work together? Not just how can you come and support my ministry, right? So I think more and more, at least here, Southern California, those are some of the stories I've been hearing. And I think this issue hopefully highlights there is, and in bringing these examples to light, this is not about a like one up, one down. I think our hope is that across our Asian American Christian communities, we all have different strengths, different formal trainings, research capacities, and together, every field, every ministry person, whether we are ordained or we have a license, that we are here to work together for the well being of all Asian American Christian families and communities. But I think that has been encouraging to see just in the recent years. I would say, I'm just thinking about this now, David, the role that you play in centering Asian American Christian mental health at the national level and highlighting the voices of practitioners, of researchers in mental health. I think that these are significant things. Like every event that occurs in our community is shifting the landscape. So whether it's this special issue, the conferences that many of us put on, I think they shape these discourses. So those are some of the things I've been seeing.
Let's pick up where Jessica left off about this mutual partnership and collaboration between practicing clinicians and pastors in ministry. I'd like to hear, so here's some context. When I look at the audience of our podcasts and our conferences and our blogs, a very good number of them will be clergy, pastors, perhaps campus staff workers, but basically ministry leaders. And then we've got, given the prominence of our mental health conference, a good number of therapists, psychologists, perhaps even social workers, people in the caring business. What Jessica is saying, we could operate in silos, but wouldn't it make more sense if we operated as partners?
In the friendships I have with pastors, one of the things, and this is somewhat similar to the training of physicians who I've worked with, and I think, Joel, you probably work with now, the training in both medical context, but also for many pastors, is that you have to know everything. And you are the one that your congregants are going to go to. So make sure you're ready, you're prepared. And the reality is, in many ethnic communities, this is the case. The pastor is still often the person that families go to, couples go to because their marriage is not doing well. They have a crisis in their parenting. They are there when elders are in the hospital. And so it's often a high crisis, lots of trauma, high stress environment, because being a pastor is addressing every challenge of life. While all of that is true, I think what I would want to encourage and speak to our pastor friends and collaborators in ministry is that you also don't have to be. It could be a both and reality of there's a whole lot that is your expertise, and you have the lived experience day in and day out to deal with. And there are areas that you don't have to be the expert in, and you are not. And that is okay to accept and lean into, and to recognize that there are so many of us. I say us because we are the trained mental health practitioners who spend literally our every waking moment thinking about what, how, when, to what degree, like serving our communities, relational, emotional, psychological well-being. And I would say so many of these therapists and psychologists are ready to collaborate. And I think all of us take part in breaking down the historical stigma that has been around within Christian spaces about true collaboration. And so something as simple as, if you don't yet know the Asian American Christian therapists and psychologists in your community, doing a quick Google search, reaching out to any of us in our seminaries and centers, because we have the resources to share with you who those folks might be, to have coffee, have a meal together, and just learn from one another. I Many of the therapists here, the ones I get to work with in Southern California, the greater LA area, we went into our fields to serve the church. And right now is such a ripe time for good collaborative relationships to be built. And so many of us are eager and willing to. I also want to speak to something that in some spaces that could be taboo. I know the conversations we've been having at Fuller, these are a bit more commonplace now, but I think it's also pastors feeling the burden of having to have their own lives and mental health and family relationships in order, right? Feeling like, oh gosh, my marriage is not in the best place, or I don't think I'm the best dad or mom out there. And then the burden of taking care of other people's marriages or their families. In our Asian American cultural relational ethics, it's typically taboo to talk about some of these personal challenges. And I just want to put this out there because that can create a conscious or unconscious barrier for a pastor to feel comfortable in reaching out even to a therapist or psychologist to support their congregation, because there's a fear of, what if my own issues become part of this and I'm not ready? And I just want to say that's okay. We don't always have to be ready. And that's okay to say, I've got all this stuff going on and my congregation needs support. Let's address one thing at a time. So I'll just leave it there. But I want to normalize that this is a common struggle of people in ministry, is the worry about, my family's not in the best place. How am I doing this ministry work with other families? And what does it mean for me to invite experts, so to speak, on family relationships or psychology, because it makes me feel extra vulnerable?
It takes so much courage to reach across the aisle and ask for help. It takes a lot of courage, it takes vulnerability, it takes humility. And I imagine like us, like as a professional, as a faculty member, as a researcher, I place pressures on myself to have all the answers. When I'm working with a learner and they ask me a question and I don't know because it's about medication and I don't prescribe medication, I could it takes effort. It takes a lot of humility for me to shift of, well, I'm not quite sure. And let's find a colleague, a professional, an expert who could speak to that more competently. Now, there's this inner part of myself that wants to learn more, and so that striving is important for me. And at the same time, I don't have to shoulder the burden by myself. And so learning and even guest editing together, that was a practice of humility for myself as well, because I don't know qualitative methods as much, or I don't know a part of Asian American studies as well. And so working together is a professional development, but it's also personal development as well. And I love that about this field and the work that I do. And so I suppose for those practitioners in the community, those clergy, church leaders as well, it's an exercise of surrendering and being open to knowing something beyond ourselves that I think is virtuous. I think that is spiritual and ultimately can lead to a more holistic, more communal orientation of healing and loving more and creating stronger relationships as well. So, um, yeah, I would just echo everything that you were saying, Jessica. That was great.
I find that to be a really fitting conclusion to this very robust and insightful conversation. What I'm left with is an aspiration for greater collaboration. And the challenge and perhaps even invitation that I'm hearing from both of you is the need for courage, vulnerability, willingness. I think this requires some work of the Holy Spirit within us. So, come, Holy Spirit, we invite you into our Asian American faith leaders and into our communities that through the power of the Spirit and through good therapeutic practice and pastoral care, we can see our communities becoming, receiving healing so that they may become more whole. I think both therapists and pastors who love their Asian American Christian communities want to see more healing towards wholeness. And I think that's what this special issue of JPT also aims for. And I'm just so grateful for both of you and the work of your team to provide this issue for our community.
Thanks for having us. Thanks, Jessica.